Good evening, friends. A warm welcome to you all. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Andre Liu, who's the president of an international organization called as IFOM, I-F-O-M, which is an abbreviated form of International Federation for Organic Agriculture Movements. It's an umbrella organization which is active in 120 countries, and more than 800 organizations are part of this organization, IFOM. So the main purpose of this organization is to promote organic agriculture worldwide, and at the same time lobby for policies and practices which are pro-poor, which are small farmer centric all over the world. So we have been lucky enough to have Andre Liu over here with us, who had a very tight schedule. I think it was a divine intervention for him to reschedule his trip and come over here to MUM. And I took him all around today. He was extremely impressed with so many activities that we are doing, which fits into the mission and vision of IFOM activities. There are also various proposals for us to collaborate and work together. Andre Liu has been an organic farmer for 40 years. He's basically from Australia. This IFOM organization is based in Germany. And Andre has been a tropical fruit grower. He grows lychees, longans, durians, rambutans, and things like that. And recently, he has been re-elected as the president. So he is the president for the second term of IFOM. I think let us give a big round of applause and welcome Andre Liu, who will be speaking on the mix of pesticides.
Thank you, Tamar. And Tamar and I go back a long way for Bhutan and India, so when he invited me, I took the opportunity to come here, and I can tell you how pleased I am that I took this opportunity. And I personally look forward to a long collaboration and friendship between our organisations. I think we're like-minded organisations, and the more we can work together, the better we can make this planet. I wrote this particular book, The Myths of Safe Pesticides, because everywhere I go I hear that now pesticides are tested scientifically, they're used scientifically, so there's no worries about pesticides in our foods. So what's the point of being organic? I think that's a good question. So I wanted to answer it. Firstly, a little slide about us. Tamar was already mentioned. We are a organisation of organisations. We have over 800. Last count was 125 countries. We work with certified organic farmers, around 2 million, but we also work with our definition of organic. It's not just certified organic, but it's all farmers who farm through the principles of organic agriculture. And particularly, the majority of the world's farmers are smallholder farmers or small family farmers. We really represent the majority of the world's farmers, which is well over, say, 500 million. Now, the book, I'll just go through a quick synopsis, and then the area I wanted to concentrate on is particularly pesticides in children, because I think this is one of the most critical areas that is not being looked at by regulatory authorities. This issue was clear my throat.
Turn down the light a little.
I don't want to come up here because I'm talking with my hand. I've got it over the computer, and I've learned from past experience it's not good for them. Okay, so the first myth that I'd like to put out is the rigorously tested myth. We all hear that all pesticides are rigorously tested. The fact is, all pesticides are not rigorously tested. They only test one ingredient they call the active ingredient. And but all pesticides that are sold are a formulation. They have synergists, surfactants, a whole range of other compounds that are in there to make it work more effectively. And where, in the few cases where these formulated pesticides are tested, it's not just slightly more toxic. We're talking, 100 or 200, 300 times more toxic. In some cases, we're going up to 1,000 times more toxic with the limited testing. And particularly, I think, what is very important is that there's no specific testing for issues like children's health, reproductive issues. I'll talk more about cancer and what we call neurotoxicity, where it damages the developing nervous system. And of course, our biggest collection of nerves is the brain. And so I'll talk more about that later. And there's absolutely no testing. In some cases, they will test the formulation for what they call the LD50, which is the lethal dose, 50% of test animals. That's acute toxicity. In other words, how much will kill you, and the time, within a time period of 2 weeks. And anything that's not dead after 2 weeks, well, therefore it's safe. But we know things like cancer, nervous diseases, all these other reproductive diseases, they take years, sometimes a lifetime. The other one, which I think is very important that they don't test, is for the cocktail of chemicals that we're exposed to. The regulatory authorities, they don't just approve one pesticide for one crop. They will approve some insecticides, some fungicides, some herbicides, miticides, all forms of sides. And all of them are allowed to be used and are expected to be used in the normal production. So when we look at the testing of food here in the United States, and the testing in this case is parts per million, so if they go down to parts per trillion, you'll find it's close to 100% of foods will have pesticides. But at parts per million, over 70% of the food will have pesticides. But more than over 50% will have multiple residues. There is no testing for the effects of these multiple residues. Where there has been limited testing, and I go into detail in the book, we have the effect of synergy, where 1 and 1 instead of equaling 2 equals 3, 4. Actually, in some cases, we know 1 and 1 can equal 1,000. And in terms of long-term effects, what it is doing, we know now can affect future generations. In other words, if the mother is exposed, it can affect the great-grandchildren now with the data we have. And I think one of the most disturbing bits of research has come out by the Environmental Working Group. In the United States, they found up to 232 chemicals in the placental cord blood of newborns. In other words, these are crossing the placental barrier. So our regulatory authorities are completely failing to stop our next generation from being exposed to these chemicals. And they're actually ignoring it by not doing any science on it, and on the assumption, because they've tested the active ingredients of these chemicals singly, therefore that they are safe, that there's no additive or synergistic effect. Whereas when we look at the science, we know there are additive and synergistic effects. So I think one of the most critical things, and I want to talk about that in depth, is that the testing is just done for adolescent and adult animals, and yet we know now that the fetus, the unborn, and young children are particularly vulnerable to these chemicals. They don't have the protective serum proteins, their livers can't detoxify them. We also know that as they're growing, hormones send out signals to genes to develop parts of the body, the limbs, the whole reproductive system, the brain, the hormone system, all these things, certain levels of hormones are parts per trillion, And a part per trillion is the equivalent of 1 drop of water in 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water. And we know now that some of these chemicals at that level act like hormones and interfere with the normal signaling and developing of children. And there's no proper testing for it. Over 30 years now, all the regulatory agencies have said they'll start doing it. 30 years later, they're ignoring it and not doing it. Are subject to lawsuits at the moment by groups like the Environmental Working Group here to get them to do what they were supposed to do under law. So what I just talked about there is what I call a very small amount. We hear that the residue levels are so low that we don't have to worry about it. And I go into great detail in that, showing that is not the case. And the example I just used before of when at parts per trillion these chemicals become even more toxic than parts per million because they act as hormone disruptors. That is a major issue. In fact, we're learning now that there really is, with many of these chemicals, there really is no safe level